Hello, everybody. Can you see me and hear me all right? How is this camera doing? It looks a bit blurry to me. Let me see if I can fix that. Oh, that's maybe a little better. It's a bit grubby. Can you hear me all right? Can you see me all right? Please let me know in the chat if we're all good. And let me just say hi to everybody who I've seen in the chat. Hey, Novo. Hey, El or Tevka. Hey, Natasha. And if you're here, then drop a hello in the chat. This is also going out to Facebook as well as YouTube, and the chat will come through to me either way. So wherever you are, say hello. Hey, Patricia. And yeah, we can get going with this. So the main gist of what I want to talk about today really centers around, this is bothering me that this is kind of blurry. I'm not sure why that is. Hey, Margie. Give me a moment to do this. See if that helps. Maybe it did. I don't know. Hey, JF. So yeah, so the main gist of what I want to talk about today really is about keeping safe from cults. And we talk a lot about critical thinking on the channel. That's been something that I've discussed ad nauseum, I think. And I've been exploring a lot of stuff lately around philosophy and psychology with regards to freedom of the individual, freedom of mind in a broader context than cults. And hey, Mia, on Facebook, that's cool. But yeah, and hopefully the Facebook servers don't conk again. Yeah, that would be unfortunate. Yeah, so we talk a lot about critical thinking, and I think that one of the things that isn't talked about enough is also one of the things that is super central, I think, to whether a person gets swept up in a destructive group or not, whether someone gets caught in a cult or not. And it really ties into, and I'm going to explicitly say it in a second and get into all the specifics that I think that sort of apply to this. But before I do, I want to say this really ties into being an individual, like fully becoming an individual in a way that, interestingly and frustratingly, our society doesn't really encourage. And that's not necessarily anything, that's not as much as a societal or cultural criticism as it is an observation of the nature of humanity, because compliance has been historically an evolutionary advantage, right? And we're at a point now in our society where through religion doing what it did in the past, and then sort of capitalism taking over, we now have a really individually focused, individualistic, if you like, culture. And I think that is a good thing. There's downsides to it, there's problems to it. And when it comes up in the form of, like, for example, neoliberal capitalism, you have the problem of people clambering over each other to try to sort of squash each other and fulfill whatever it is they're trying to fulfill, do whatever they want to do. It comes in negative ways. But ultimately, I think the individual is something that is molded quite often by society without the knowledge of the person, if you like. And we often think that we're an individual. We often think that we're thinking for ourselves and that we're doing things on the basis of our own values and principles. And yet, quite often, that's not the case in my experience. And I don't know if you also find this, and feel free to let me know your thoughts as I'm talking about this in the chat, because I'm interested if you agree, if you disagree, where you disagree, if you do, where you agree, if you do. Let's make this a bit of a discussion as I go through what I've written down here. Inevitably, there'll be a point during the live stream where I run out of notes and want to just have a discussion. So please share your thoughts as we're going through this. But this is something that I've found for myself, and it's something that I've seen repeatedly whenever I'm looking at philosophy and psychology pertaining to freedom and pertaining to cults, is, and I'll speak from my own experience here. When I was pulled up into the cult that I got involved in, and when I got sort of swept up in groupthink at other points in my life, sorry if you can hear my chair sort of squeaking behind. I need to get some oil on that or some WD-40. But yeah, one thing that's sort of been pervasive throughout my own times, throughout my own experiences, getting swept up in groupthink, getting swept up in this cult and things like that, has been that I thought I was like really an individual in a meaningful way, other than just existing as a person who is in a physical way separate from other people, you know. But I never really took the time to clarify my own values and principles. I never really took the time to understand what it meant to think for yourself and to actually dig into the genuine difference in experience between what it's like to think for yourself and what it's like to think in a more passive way, in a way that's ostensibly thinking for yourself, but in reality repeating things you've heard or agreeing with things without giving them too much thought and things like that. So let's just jump into what I've written here and talk about what I think is a super important part of this. Critical thinking is a super important part of freedom from cults and avoiding being caught up in a cult and recovering from cults, in my experience. But I think there's also another side, there's another part here, which is self-awareness and self-knowledge, which ties into what I was just saying there about being an individual, right? So I'm going to read you some stuff I've written here and just discuss a few points that I think are central to self-awareness and self-knowledge. Before we get into anything on this, I do just want to say that therapy is an amazing way to increase your level of self-awareness and increase the self-knowledge that you have. And if you do have access to that, please pursue that. Even if you don't think you need it, you might be surprised. And everything else that I'm sharing here is something that I think you can explore as an individual for yourself within these kinds of things, keeping the locus of control within you. But therapy will help throughout all of these things as well. So here's one thing that I think is really important to say. In my experience, self-knowledge is a consequence of a familiarity with what it means to be self-aware on a daily basis. And that might sound a bit ethereal, but I'm just going to explain what I mean by that. Self-knowledge, in my estimation, in my mind, is a collection of insights that you have about yourself, things that you know, what you're like, how you do things, how you might respond to something, and also within that, a knowledge of your own values and principles, a knowledge of your own preferences and things that you like, dislike, all that kind of stuff, right? But self-awareness is like a skill. It's like a muscle, in my experience, that if you make a point of practicing it, then self-knowledge will be the result of that. And all of this requires courage, a courage to face difficult things in yourself, courage to maybe look at things that you might not want to look at, be that in yourself, in society, in your life, and things like that. But to go on this process of self-discovery, to go on this process of increasing your level of self-awareness tends to result in an increased level of self-knowledge, in my experience. And so let's just talk about a few of the things that are central to that. In my experience, one of them is psychoeducation, and that's why I say therapy is super helpful here. But if you don't have access to that, but you do have access to something like Audible or Scribed or just books, I don't know why I said Audible and Scribed before just books, but I guess that's the era we live in now, isn't it? I don't really like to read. I prefer audiobooks as well. I like to have them on and just sort of absorb the information, go back a few times maybe. But psychoeducation is super important. If you can understand how humans tend to respond to things, then you have a greater clarity of how you might respond to things in a given circumstance, or how your mind's working in a way, under the surface, from moment to moment. And so to apply that to, for example, cult recruitment, one of the times that when you get pulled up into, one of the times, I'm trying to get my sentence right, one of the times when you are potentially about to be recruited by a cult, no, try that sentence again. Cult recruitment tends to hook into difficulties that a person's having in their life. If you're going through a change in your life, if you're going through a difficult period emotionally with your mental health or something, you are more at risk for cult recruitment. You are more at risk to get pulled into a cult. Now, critical thinking is helpful in that context, as we talked about before, because it helps you to pick apart the things that you're being told and so on. But if you have a degree of self-awareness too, you will know, I'm going through something difficult right now. And I talked about this, I think, in a previous video. You'll know, I'm going through something difficult right now. I'm dealing with something with my mental health. Therefore, I'm more likely to be swept up in promises that are being made, for things that people are saying to sound better to me, right? If you have that awareness of yourself, I know I tend to respond to X thing in X way, then okay, when it comes to someone saying things to you, trying to pull you into a cult, then you're immediately more aware that you might be more likely for that to appeal to you. And so you can withdraw and fulfill those needs in some other way, if that makes sense. So I think generally psychoeducation is fantastic, and it should be something that I think we can and should all pursue if it's available to us. Be that through books, be that through therapy, whatever it is, and I do have a lot of really good resources that I am amassing at the moment. I've been sharing some of them on Patreon and my book recommendations, but I'm thinking what I'll probably do is I'll put together another page, which is sort of resources on sort of freedom of mind in a specific way. So as and when I have that, I'll announce that on maybe the community tab on my Instagram, things like that. Speaking of, if you don't follow me on Instagram, where is it? There. Please follow me on Insta. That's where all the fun sort of stuff goes on behind the scenes. But that's not true. Behind the scenes stuff is Patreon. But when I'm building up to what I'm going to talk about in a video, I'm sharing extra content, sharing a bit more from my own personal stuff as I'm figuring this kind of stuff out. It's Instagram that I'm sharing that on at the moment. So follow me on there if you haven't already. So talking about self-awareness and self-knowledge, really what it means to me to have that is to have a sort of ability to evaluate the inner workings of your mind without moral or value judgments on whatever it is that's going on in your mind in that moment. Let me read what you've said here, Mia, because that looks interesting. Self-awareness explained that way is as useful to prevent being pulled into cults at vulnerable times. Is a really good point. Yes, I agree, and I'm glad you think so. When it comes to avoiding cults, being able to understand what's going on inside yourself is super, super important, because cults will use your blind spots to manipulate you. That's how these kinds of things tend to get you. They tend to hook into what you don't know, what you're not aware of about yourself, in that way. And I think that, if you read the literature on this, you read the books from experts on this, it will point you in that direction as well. It will sort of highlight that. It is, as I mentioned already, I guess, it is during those difficult periods of your life that you're more susceptible. And if you're more aware of what's going on for you in those moments and what you might need in those moments, there's no door or there's no way for a cult to get its foot in the door, because you're already seeing to those needs. You're already looking after yourself in that way. And in an interesting way, I think that goes some way to speaking to why cults are so prevalent these days, because if we've got a society where we do have a lot of people who aren't necessarily self-aware in that sense. In fact, no, now I'm saying that I'm disagreeing with myself a little bit, because I think we may be more self-aware these days than we've been historically, perhaps just due to the fact that, psychology is further along and therapy is more accessible and so on and so forth. However, I do think it has to be said that adverse childhood experiences, as wealth inequality and so on are what they are now, there's definitely an argument to be made for home environments being more difficult, thus the individual finding it more difficult to develop a sense of self, and thus cults being able to hook into that and help people feel like they belong, give them some sense of relief from the burden of liberty when people leave home, so that they don't feel so alone and feel so helpless in the world. And I think that's something that the cult definitely did for me to some extent, and you may relate to that as well. I just seen Dr. Cross in the chat. Hi, Dr. Cross, welcome. But yeah, and that's just reminded me to say, actually, as ever, I think it's important to know that I'm not an expert in this. I'm just sharing my own experience and the things that I've learned. So please think deeply and reflect on what I've said. But no, please think deeply about what I'm saying, maybe reflect on what I've said, but also make sure you check out the sources that I'm sharing all of these things from. Obviously, my own experience isn't a source you can check out, but I'm also going to be sharing various books and things as I go along. So where did we get to on this? And actually, I've just mentioned something I've just said there that makes me think. The Escape from Freedom book, Escape from Freedom by Erich Fromm, is a fantastic read. It's one that I'm coming to the end of at the moment, and I'm finding it really, really fascinating, really eye-opening, and one that I highly recommend and will definitely be in my Patreon recommendations for this month, which I'll be discussing more in the live for patrons at the end of the month. But yeah, definitely that's a book to check out, and it's definitely relevant. Why is this so blurry? Relevant to this conversation here today on prevention of cult indoctrination and cult recruitment. So here's another point on self-awareness and on the point of self-knowledge, acknowledgement of your own limitations, of both your knowledge and your experience, and also your skill as well. Being able to acknowledge what you don't know, being able to acknowledge what you feel your limitations are, and what the limits of your experience are too. I think there's something about, especially when you're younger, and again, I got pulled up in this cult thing when I was like 19, something like that. And the naivety, the hubris of a younger person is unparalleled. And I didn't ever really recognize the limits of my experience, the limits of my knowledge and my skill. And I think that made it more likely for me to get pulled up. And I think so nowadays, that's something that I am aware of, not to diminish the value or the extent of my experience and knowledge and skill as they exist now, but to recognize that necessarily they do have their limits. And yes, there will be things I don't know. Yes, there'll be things that I haven't fully experienced. And yes, there'll be things I'm not good at. And seeking to grow in those areas means that, first of all, acknowledging them is practicing self-awareness and recognizing that that's the case, and then going out to improve in those areas is also, I think, an important part of ensuring that you do maintain autonomy of mind, freedom of mind, independence of mind. Pick whichever synonym you prefer, whichever one doesn't drive you crazy. And I think it's important for preserving that outside of the cult situation anyway, because society, culture is always vying for your allegiance in one way or another. It's always vying for you to throw in with one group, to buy a product, to identify as this, that, or the other. And I think it's important to ensure that we are attempting to preserve our autonomy as individuals within that, aside from cults, but especially with cults, because it's going to be 10 times more destructive, I think. I say 10 times. I imagine it will vary, but it will be more destructive when it's a cult than if it's culture in general. Although the planet may disagree, has to be said. So another point here is familiarity with your typical emotional reactions, triggers, and their trajectories in terms of your emotional responses, the behavior that you might play out. For example, I've struggled in my life with knowing how I feel, like literally knowing how I feel, and recognizing that I'm having an emotional reaction to something has been quite difficult for me in my life. So for me, what this has looked like is making a deliberate attempt to connect with my emotions on a regular basis so that I can get familiar with, if something upsets me, how am I going to act out? You know, am I going to start to take this out on others? Am I going to be passive aggressive? Am I going to withdraw? Am I going to start to feel a real decrease in my motivation, right? If I'm aware of how I'm going to respond to those things, I will know if, when it comes to something like, let's say I'm watching videos on YouTube like I was once upon a time, and something there is appealing to a feeling that I've got, if that thing is more appealing to me in that moment for some reason, maybe that's an indication that actually there's something going on for me that I haven't recognized or acknowledged yet. Does that make sense? For me, that is a huge thing. If I understand the way that I respond to the pains in my life, the difficulties in my life, the ways that I tend to act out, the ways that I tend to spiral, as we all do sometimes, I think, then I know if a cult is around, or if there's that, if I'm in that state, that might be one of the ways that a cult starts to work in and start to absorb my sense of self, or start to provide me potential solutions to the feelings that I'm having. Of course, they always sound better than they are in practice, but that's just another way I think that this shows up. So here's another one, and this is a big one. And actually, let me just, I've got a note in one of my many notepads here that I wanted to share with you. So let me just find this for a second as I'm speaking. But one of the points here is on, I apologize for that, a little bit of ASMR on the bookage side of things. So this next point really is about the ability to become lucid during a period of high emotional intensity and feel your feelings while having access to your wise mind, if you like, which is a term that I've picked up from a book called Calming the Emotional Storm, I think is the book that I got that from, by Sheri Van Dijk, I think is the author's name. It's a great book anyway, if that's not the book I got it from, but I believe that's the book I got it from. And that's about DBT skills, that book. I've just realized I'm looking for this quote in the wrong book. So I've got another book here and it will be easier to find. I've got like a million notepads. Welcome to my mind. Okay, so this is a quote I wanted to share, and I think this is a really useful one. Full disclosure, this quote comes from a video game, but that doesn't make it any less profound. For anyone who's played Enderroll, you will understand what I mean by it's no less profound. Enderroll changed my life. Anyway, so here's the quote. It says, "A great philosopher once said that every change begins with a moment of lucidity. In these moments, a veil opens, one which normally shrouds all the unwelcome truths we are aware of, but which we have buried deep within ourselves, where we cannot see them. And it is only these moments in which we can make a decision, the decision to either act or to let the moment pass until the veil seals itself again, and we are once more the slaves of our habits." Now, that is just brilliant. And I've been trying to figure out, and I might have to contact the author, but I've been trying to figure out who the great philosopher mentioned was. But it does sound very Jungian, that, to be honest with you. And that point of a moment of lucidity where the veil opens up and all the unwelcome truths that you didn't want to look at become clear to you. I don't know if it's all those unwelcome truths, but I've certainly had moments in my life where I have had those moments of clarity. In fact, there's a phrase, I can't remember the guy who came up with it. I'll see if I can flick through another one of my books and find it. But there's a phrase called the phrase crystallizing experience, I believe is one of the ways that that's described, where certain things happen in a Jungian sense. I guess you could call it like a synchronicity, like things sort of aligning in such a way that something clicks in you, you just sort of realize something. And so here, the crystallizing experience, Howard Gardner is the guy. I believe he's a psychologist. It says here, a crystallizing experience is a memorable, dramatic moment in which we make contact with stimuli that just clicks and makes us think, aha, that's me. So in the context of self-awareness, in the context of self-knowledge, hey Pam, welcome. There is a requirement for courage and a willingness to see those uncomfortable things. But in those moments of lucidity, in those crystallizing experiences where things just sort of come together and make sense, that is almost like a window being open for change. And so to apply that then to this cult situation that we're talking about, prevention of cult recruitment, those kinds of moments go a long way to developing a level of self-knowledge that does help us to prevent a cult hooking itself into us. But I also think generally that's just a really fucking useful thing to have. It's a really useful thing to be open to, because it's been in my life, those moments where, like really pivotal moments in my life where things have changed, not just in like circumstantially, but in myself on a psychological level, on an emotional level, in terms of who I actually exist as in my life, who I show up as for the people in my life, who I am to myself. It's been those crystallizing moments, those moments of lucidity where I see things. It's almost like you see things from a whole other angle. You see yourself, not from outside yourself in like a dissociative way, but with a level of clarity just for one moment, maybe on one specific thing that you don't necessarily have access to normally. And that changes things in the long run. And if you're open to allowing those things to change you, in my experience, then that's how you kind of tend to grow as a person. And again, I think, and this is something that I'm thinking of now as we sort of stumbled onto it as we're talking about this, it may not be the case in every instance, but I think cults tend to offer personal growth, ostensibly tend to offer personal growth to their recruits. I know that was the case in the group that I was involved in. And I know that's the case in something like Scientology, for example. I don't necessarily think it's the case with something like Jehovah's Witnesses, let's say. Although in a sense it does, but maybe not in the same way as other groups. And I think that if you as a person are on a journey of tangible personal growth, that can both make it more likely and less likely for you to end up in a cult, depending on how it is that the shape that takes in your life, basically. And I think that something that underpins the likelihood to get caught up in a cult, and this is in some part speculation on my part, but I think something that does increase your likelihood to get caught up in a cult is whether you yourself have found the strength and the courage to shoulder the burden of liberty, to rise to the challenge of living as a free and autonomous, independent individual. And if you haven't, and you're going on this journey of self-discovery, you might find that a cult doesn't mind too much that you haven't shouldered that burden, doesn't mind too much that you haven't found a true sense of security with the insecurities of life, a recognition and acceptance of the uncertainty of life, because they will swoop in and they will give you that and not worry about that, But if you found in yourself a sense of a recognition, and there's a quote that I put on my Insta recently, which I'll see if I can find it. This is the journal it's in. I know that. I'll find that. But the certainty with uncertainty, the acceptance that the only certainty in life is uncertainty, and to live with insecurity is the only security. And these are, it's almost verbatim, I've just read it there. Uncertainty is the only certainty there is, and learning how to live with insecurity is the only security. Can't remember the guy who said that, but that's on my Instagram in one of the captions if you're interested. It went up this week, so it's one of them there. But yeah, that's a huge thing as well, being able to rise to the challenge of living with the inevitable, unavoidable uncertainty of life, the inevitable, unavoidable insecurity of living as a human in a world full of other humans where just about anything can happen. If we're able to face up to that and really deeply accept that, then when a cult comes along and it says, hey, don't you want some certainty? Hey, listen to our leader. They've got all the answers. Hey, this is a solution to all your problems, by the way. It's less appealing because you can see it for what it is. You can understand that it's probably false. It's probably a lie. It's probably misleading. And if nothing else, you can look at that. And I say, if nothing else, I think perhaps more accurately, ideally, when a cult comes along to try to bring you in that way, if you have already got that sense of courage to face up to the insecurities and the uncertainties of life, you won't need the cult, because you will understand, yes, it's more difficult and more uncomfortable at times to live with that uncertainty and that insecurity. And yet that is much more worthwhile because it enables you to live more fully, to be more yourself, connect more with yourself, engage with others and connect with others in a more real and deep way, and to face life head on rather than retreating from it. And I think that's a really important point here as well, which is that of the avoidance of experience versus openness to experience. I think it's important to try to be open to experiences, but as I've talked about on the channel before, safety first. For me, that's my operating procedure with that. Safety first, then play. And when it comes to cults, openness to experience again can be like a double-edged blade, a little bit, a double-edged sword, what's the right phrase there. But if you have that self-knowledge, you have that self-awareness hooked in or established first, then when it comes to a cult trying to pull you in, but there's less for them to appeal to, in a sense, because you know yourself a little bit better than you might have done otherwise. You know what your needs are, and you know you're doing your best to fulfill them in a way that is healthy for you, so then when a cult does come along and they're trying to offer that, there's not so much for them to appeal to. There's not that texture that they can get stuck into in terms of your emotional pains and so on. So that would be what I would say on self-awareness and self-knowledge. That's my perspective on that. Take it or leave it. I'm sure there'll be some things you agree with and some things you disagree with. But I'm open to hearing your perspective on that. And there's also a few other things that viewers and followers on Instagram wanted me to talk about a little bit. So I will do that shortly. But if there's anything that jumped out for you in what I said, anything that you want to discuss there, then please do that. Please drop that in the chat and we'll talk about that. Margie, I know you've said something here. Cultivating space for myself between being hit with an emotional reaction and how I'm going to respond is so huge for me and has been a lifelong challenge. I can relate to that. And I think that it's so important to be able to introduce that space. And that's something that, when I've been working with my therapist, that's something that she really brought to my attention as well, being able to have that space, introducing that space. And I think it's a DBT thing, if I'm not wrong as well, which is covered in Calming the Emotional Storm by Sheri Van Dijk, which is one of the books that's inspired and influenced a lot of what I've said thus far in this discussion. So actually, that reminds me, while we're on this, let me just tell you the books that inspired some of the things that I was saying there. I mentioned two of them already. There's only three, but I want to just make sure that it's clear exactly where I'm getting this from if you want to find out more about what I'm talking about and hear what's informed my perspective on this. So Calming the Emotional Storm by Sheri Van Dijk, Escape from Freedom by Erich Fromm, and Transcend by Scott Barry Kaufman. Now, Scott Barry Kaufman's book Transcend is using a lot more of the modern evidence that we have and studies that we have on psychology, and bringing Maslow's hierarchy of needs into that, and exploring what modern sort of evidence and research says in terms of what Maslow said, getting rid of the pyramid that was invented by, I believe, a marketing guy in the 50s, and replacing it with a little bit more of an actionable, comprehensive model. I found it really useful, really, really insightful, and really fascinating. Escape from Freedom is one of those foundational books when it comes to sort of a classic book when it comes to autonomy of mind. It came out of the Frankfurt School, and there's a lot of very, very useful and worthwhile insights in that, not only for us as individuals, but also for us trying to understand the authoritarian personality, if you like, the likely tendencies of cult leaders and so on. And as I mentioned, Calming the Emotional Storm also is a book on DBT skills, and I found it tremendously useful, really, really useful. So I highly recommend those books. All of them are on either Scribd or Audible. I know that the last two are on Audible. That's where I listen to them. But Scribd is good as well. Not enough people know about Scribd. Sometimes it has stuff Audible doesn't have, and it has audiobooks, and you can read books on there as well. So yeah, if there's anything that anyone sort of wanted to share, or any ideas or any questions on anything I've said, or any comments on anything I've said, please drop that in the comments. We can chat about that. But I had a few other things from Instagram from a few people that wanted me to discuss a few things. So let's talk about this. This is a really interesting one. There's a quote from Karl Marx that someone asked me to have a comment on, which is, "The first requisite for the happiness of the people is the abolition of religion." Now, Marx had a lot of true and good things to say, but I don't agree with him on that. It would definitely depend how you define religion and how you define happiness, I think. And I'm not sure how he was defining those things within the context of his work. But as far as the abolition of religion being a prerequisite for happiness goes, in my own definitions of those things, I definitely think that religion can be a source of happiness for people. It can be a source for peace, which can be a foundation for happiness. And I do think that, if nothing else, a sense of spirituality can enrich someone's life, but it can also mean that they find it easier to handle the burden of freedom, which we've discussed here, that burden of liberty. However, if religion requires philosophical death, if it requires no longer questioning, if it requires no longer exploring things for yourself, and exploring ideas and a sense of curiosity, if religion requires that, then I think it will be damaging for happiness, because I do feel like people tend to become more unhappy the more there is a restriction in themselves against things that they want to go for. I think that sounds kind of obvious. Oh, I spat then. Kind of obvious, but I think we're more likely to be destructive. This is a point that Erich Fromm made in this book, which was very well made, I think. We're more likely to be destructive when we are restricting, or there is something which is stopping us going towards something that is spontaneously occurring to us in that way, right? And that doesn't mean it's a good thing necessarily that we always go towards our spontaneous urges. I think that could be destructive too. Because many of those, just to like bear in mind the subconscious element of that, I think many of those spontaneous urges are potentially coming from a place that is not in our best interest. So I think it's important to not just this brushes up quite close to a whole Teal thing, doesn't it? About going in the direction of your desire and whatever your emotion is. And I think I think the emotions and desires need to be one of the things that we're considering when it comes to exploring things. I don't think it's a good idea to give them free rein. I think it's important to introduce an adult mind that tells us whether it's a good idea or not to go for that thing, you know. That's the wise mind thing that I kind of mentioned talking about the DBT skills. So I think, no, I don't think that religion is an enemy of happiness. I think it can be. And I think it often is, but I don't think it has to be. And I think it really comes down to the individual maintaining a degree of individuality and a degree of freedom and independence of mind in their exploration of those things. Yeah, that's my thoughts on that. Sorry to upset any anti-theists in the audience if I didn't already piss you off with my last video. But yeah, so open to any thoughts or opinions on what I've said there as well. Please go ahead and drop those in the chat as we're going through. So someone else has said, when should I tell my honest, authentic opinion? When's it better to keep it to myself? I don't know. I don't know your circumstance on that one, but for myself, the most important thing I think is that I've acknowledged what my honest opinion is, how I really feel. If I've acknowledged that with myself, in myself, then I know that I can make a judgment call when it comes to other people and other situations. The most important thing is that I'm on good terms with myself and that I'm living in integrity within myself, avoiding rationalizations to make it feel like I'm living in integrity when I'm not, but also ensuring that I'm being considerate of other people's boundaries and so on throughout that. I think as long as you're trying to not be nasty and inconsiderate, then I think honesty is a great policy. That's my opinion on that. So those are two things that jumped out. There's a few other things, but I don't know if it warrants sitting down and talking to them here. Maybe that's the thing for a whole other video, or maybe I've already covered it on the channel. I know there was a comment of someone asking me to talk about the New Age to Jesus thing from a more psychological perspective. But yeah, that is something that I've talked about on the channel twice, maybe 3 times already, the New Age to Jesus thing. So I don't think there's much more to be said on that at this point, at least not off the top of my head. There's a wealth of knowledge in that one statement, Andy. Thanks, Margie. Which statement? Which one was it? My honesty gets me in trouble, pal. Let me put this up on the screen for anyone who doesn't see this later. Yeah, no, I can relate. But I also have a huge, like, sort of self-editing tendency where I try to avoid upsetting people, which doesn't help me be myself very much. So I've been trying to let that sort of let things pass that more often lately. On Instagram in particular, I've been letting rip a little bit more. It's a much better place for me to do that than Twitter, because Twitter's immediately a time to dogpile, and I will get in trouble if I say anything that's not, you know, in agreement with the predominant narrative of, you know, the whole identitarian left sort of space, which tended to be what I was more involved with. If I speak my mind on Twitter, I'm going to get in trouble more likely, because that's the general milieu of Twitter, isn't it? It's the general atmosphere of Twitter, that sort of identitarian left milieu. Margie, you've said here, when you responded regarding when to respond with integrity and respecting others' boundaries. Yeah, I think that's important. Yeah. Mia, this is interesting what you've said here. Thank you for sharing this. From personal experience, I don't think that JWs offer personal growth, but rather undermine one's autonomy. Therefore, a sense of self-awareness and confidence in one's own ability to think for oneself and recognize cult speak is so important. Otherwise, this particular cult will quickly swallow up a person who gives their power over to them. I definitely see what you're saying there, and would definitely agree. I think to the extent that I mentioned personal growth in the JW context, it does appear in a different way, but it's not personal growth in the way that you or I might imagine it to be. Ostensibly, it's personal growth, but it is not personal growth for the benefit of the person. It will be more growth to the benefit of the group. So it seems like it's personal growth, but like in actuality, functionally, it is being absorbed into a group. And I think that's the case with pretty much all cults. It's a lot of times they offer something that seems like personal growth. And in the case of this, I don't think they're even offering something that does seem like personal growth. And I definitely agree with you on that. But no, I do agree with you there. And I don't think that they offer personal growth. But I think they offer something sometimes that might seem like it is personal growth, although I think it tends to be safety, a sense of safety, a sense of clarity, a sense of certainty that they offer more than anything, and knocking the desk there. And more than anything, sense of hope, I think, I don't know if you'd agree with me on that, Mia, but going on my own experience with JWs in the family and sort of knowing what I know about them, I think it tends to be that sense of hope, doesn't it? Like, come to us, everything's better here. It's that sort of stereotypical, like, come to us, everything will be better here, and the hardships of the world will dissolve away, and nothing will be bad ever again. It's a very interesting thing that. Margie, you've said here. I just want to say, actually, before I move on to what Margie said, thank you for saying that, Mia. That's a really important clarification. I'm glad you shared that. Margie, you've said here, I find that checking in with myself regarding my level of trust with the individuals that helps me decide what and how much to share with someone. Yeah, I'm definitely with you there. I think it's all of this comes down to, for me, it comes down to that sense of self-awareness and that sense of self-knowledge. Like, if I'm on good terms with myself, if I know my own personal values and principles, if I know if I'm in touch with how I feel, I can use that to inform. Again, not to guide everything I'm doing, but to inform as one avenue of data gathering, one way in which I can understand things that are going on. Then I'm more likely to be able to make an accurate or at least I'm more likely to make a judgment call that is accurate or is something that I am going to stand by and trust in, But it does come down to being able to trust yourself, being able to be an individual in that way. And I think self-trust is, in my mind, self-trust is underpinned by self-awareness and self-knowledge and a charitable view of the past, of your own actions. For example, one thing that really helped me, and I talked about this in a video before, and by the way, I'm seeing sort of coming up to an hour now, so I'm gonna wrap up in about 10 minutes. So if there's anything anyone wants me to talk about or share in the meantime, please drop that in the chat, and I'll get to that before we close. But I think that in terms of my own experience with, like, for example, the teal thing, I often felt like I couldn't trust myself because I'd been caught up in something that was bad for me. But in reality, and this is a more charitable view of that and my own actions in the past, I have come to believe I can trust myself, because what was happening actually in my life, a spat again then, what was going on in my life was I was struggling with grief. I was struggling with changes in my life, and some part of me sought help. It sought an answer. Now, it happened to be that didn't help me very much, and I was actually worse off for it, right? Unfortunately, the thing I sought help in was bad for me. Nevertheless, I sought help. There was a part of me that intuitively, if you like, and that's a word that still makes my skin crawl a little bit, but intuitively sought that answer. It sought something, and I can trust that part of me, that I will continue to try to look after myself in one way or another, and also I got out of it, which again, I can trust as evidence I can trust myself, right? So I feel self-trust is built on that self-awareness and self-knowledge and that charitable view of your actions in the past. And then that itself is built on courage, in my experience. So if I have courage, then I'm able to have that greater degree of self-awareness and self-knowledge. And if I have that awareness and self-knowledge, then I'm able to trust myself more. That's how I see that for myself, at least. Hey, Sheila, welcome. So yeah, is there anything anybody else would like me to discuss? Anything anyone wants to talk about briefly before we finish? Please drop that in the comments. And before I can't talk, please drop any other thoughts or anything in the comments. And if there's anything else that you want me to talk about before we close, I'll do that. But before I get to those in the comments, I just want to throw this up on the screen and just take a moment to say, if you're enjoying the content that I'm putting out on the channel and you want to help support the channel, and or if you want to get some extra content every week, every time I put a video up, I make like an audio companion that goes with it, apart from 1 week in the month where I do a live stream for patrons. But 3 weeks in the month, every time I put a video up, I make an audio companion that goes along with it, which takes one of the things in the video, one of the points or the themes or something adjacent to it, and explores it in more detail. And these audio companions, I think, have been some of the best content I've made associated with the channel. I think that they're some of the most interesting topics to explore, and they don't always lend themselves to a video. So I really enjoy being able to explore them in the audio format, and patrons have been enjoying them too, I believe. So if you want to help support the channel, get a bit of extra content from me every week, be that an audio companion like I've just described, or a live stream that I do at the end of every month where I sit with patrons, I share some behind the scenes stuff. We have a bit of a back and forth. It's always quite sort of informal and intimate, a bit different to these sort of public lives where there's a few more people here, and it's harder for us to have like a bit more of a back and forth. These patron ones are a lot more intimate in that way. And I also share my book recommendations in those whenever I have them. I've been a bit slacking on that lately, but we're getting back on form. So yeah, if you're not a patron already, please check out the Patreon after this live stream and consider becoming a patron. Even at the lowest tier really makes a big difference. Makes content like I'm making possible and makes it justifiable for me to continue doing it with so much time and energy. Thank you as to anyone who's here who's already a patron. I'm really grateful for that. And thank you for sitting through this if you aren't able to become a patron, or if you already are a patron. Let me get back to what the comments have been here. Oh, Pam, what do I think about psychic abilities? That is a whole live stream in and of itself, because there's a lot to be said. And may I say something here, right? And I apologize for saying this, and forgive me for saying this, but next week, I've got a video that I'm planning, and if it comes together in the way that I hope it will, and it's looking like it will, the video I'm planning is why I am no longer an atheist. And in that video, I'm explaining some of the reasons for my current agnosticism and my openness to certain things. Now, I don't necessarily know that I believe in psychic abilities. I don't think I do. I don't think there's very strong evidence for it. And if they do exist, I don't think that the majority of the people that claim to have them. I think they're probably a lot rarer than we think they are. Of course, the nature of psychic abilities is that many people who want attention, who want adulation, who want to feel special in some way, are liable to feel like they have them and then act in a way that gets them what they want using them. That doesn't mean they don't necessarily exist in some way. I think the problem is there's a disconnect between the science and the scientific approach to these things and the beliefs and the ideas that people who believe in them have. In much the same way as paranormal investigation, there's a real issue there, I think, because people who are into occult philosophy, occultists who believe in paranormal experiences and phenomena, will go about engaging with them and having experiences with them which are fundamentally different from the people that you see on, like, what is it, like TMZ or like MTV or whatever, in these sort of paranormal investigations kind of things, where it's all a bit of a bit of a charade. They're not respecting the circumstance. So I think there's a disconnect there where there's like a hubris on one side and an over, maybe, I hate to say it, but like a degree of like over open-mindedness, if you like, or perhaps even naivety in some instances on the other side of things. So there's a disconnect there. And I think the same thing happens with psychic abilities. Those people who believe in them bring a little bit too much of themselves sometimes, and the people who are skeptical or don't believe in them bring a little bit too much of themselves and their point of view, and there's not much in the middle. So I think if anything like that does exist, it will start to become more clear to us as we go on, especially now that people are exploring psychedelics a little bit more for medicinal purposes. Who knows? We'll see. That single line that I just had said there about psychedelics may have been what got this live stream demonetized. We'll see. But yeah, anyway, I'm speaking next week about why I'm no longer an atheist. If that video comes together, don't hold me to it, although I'll do my best to make it something that's worth watching. And in that video, I'm talking a little bit about the limitations of the human experience as a way to determine whether or not gods or spirits or whatever exist, and certain things that I haven't really thought about very much until I came to that point and kind of was like, oh yeah, no, that does make a lot of sense. Maybe there are limitations to that we hadn't really considered in our modern era. And also relaying my own iteration of a very strong point I feel that Alan Moore made on the existence of gods and or other realities. And I'm doing my very best not to get new agey with it and keeping things logical, because I'm not going to fall into that trap. But I hope that you'll come along to that video and check that out. If you can make it to the premiere 3 p.m. next week on Thursday, I'd be very grateful. 3 p.m. PT Pacific. So let me see what you've said here, Sheila. And then if there's anything else anyone wants me to comment on or you want to share, then please drop that in the comments in the chat. Otherwise, we'll round up after this. So Sheila, you said, my granny was a Bible school teacher and I was always getting in trouble for just knowing things when I was a kid. And I think people pretend they have control over these abilities. Yeah. There's actually an interesting podcast I was listening to, Mysterious Universe. They were talking about a tribe of people who live, it's like pre-agriculture, in our timeline, you know, they're not agricultural, so hunter-gatherers, and they live as sort of one entity, as sort of organisms in one parts of one organism, if you like sort of communal. And something that was mentioned in that was the idea that, you know, like there is weirdly that thing of like if you're starting to try to control it or claim to have dominance over a certain state that allows you to access certain things that maybe we don't have access to in our regular way of approaching things. They were saying that, you know, that makes it inaccessible to them. So I think it's possible that, you know, believing that we have these abilities and have control over them may actually diminish our ability to access those abilities in a strange sort of catch-22 way. But yeah, Mysterious Universe is a good listen, by the way, if you want just sort of weird and wonderful things, fun things with a relatively open mind, presented with a relatively open mind. Pokey, you've said, I believe in spirituality. I've had enlightening spiritual experiences. I've predicted the future, but not on purpose. There's something in it, but spiritual ego is a negative thing. Oh yeah, 100%. There's a ton of spiritual sort of narcissism and communal narcissism in the New Age circles, and I mean in any spiritual circle. I see the trouble is when you have an issue that is any kind of assertion that is susceptible to doubt as being something that is capable of literally kneecapping it as even a possible idea, by which I mean if the only way of asserting the truth of something is I felt it or I've had an experience of this or whatever, I believe this, if that's the only way to justify something being true, then it's so susceptible to doubt, right? Which means that there is going to be a need to try to verify that truth. And when other people are in doubt, then there's need to verify that truth, need to ascertain some degree of approval or confirmation or acceptance of the idea from others, so that you feel less insecure about it in yourself, right? I think that's why evangelicals are so obsessed with preaching. I think it comes from an overcompensation, a real doubt in their own beliefs, their own ideas, right? And I think it's similar as well when it comes to a lot of these spiritual ideas. There's an overcompensation. There's a need to show everyone how great we are, how powerful. You're such a powerful creator. That idea, like, I create reality with my mind, and I'm a powerful creator and all this kind of stuff. I think my thing with that is, if you have to tell yourself you can literally control the universe with your mind, how insecure do you have to be? Like, are you not secure enough in your ability as an individual to navigate the world? Why do you need that to make you feel safe in the world? Now, that's not a comment on whether it's true or not, but definitely a comment on the potential for the psychological compensation in that issue, on that issue. I think it's a very interesting thing to explore. I think, it's interesting. Certain people do seem to be more prone to peak experiences in spiritual context. Some people seem to be less prone to them. I'm not the kind of person that's prone to them. The only real peak experiences I've had have been under the influence of something. So in that sense, I don't have that overwhelming sense of unity necessarily, unless I'm in a more meditative state, I guess, when I've been in the forest and so on. I have that on footage, on film. I have footage of that. I think I put that up in a video when I was reacting to my old self, me sitting there, and I was channeling, and I felt very at one with everything. And I think that was not necessarily because of anything more, perhaps because of something more, but my more cynical side wants me to believe that it was probably just down to the state of mind I was in, and some people do seem to be more prone to it, others don't. I think some people do seem to be able to predict the future, others don't. I think it tends to be the case when we are predicting the future, they're more Barnum statements than anything else, but I'm not close to the possibility that we can do that accurately. I think there's a lot we don't know, and being comfortable with that unknown and not shutting it down because there's not evidence for it is an important part of being intellectually honest. And as a skeptic, I think that is integral to one's skepticism, so that it doesn't become cynicism. The chat is lively now. I've said we're about to close. I'm liking it. Sheila, you said, I used to think other people had something I didn't in that respect, but now I think they're just mostly full of it. I can relate to that. I definitely agree. Jeremy, thank you for saying that you're enjoying the channel and the content. I really appreciate that. I don't call it a show, but I love that you have. It makes it feel more official, like it's real, like I actually exist. That's what YouTube is to me. It's a reminder that I exist. Otherwise, I'm just sort of shapes on the wall, like a two-dimensional sort of blob creature that only feels they exist when they remember to journal. Pokey, you've said, I have a lot of deja vu. I've meditated in the past and done yoga, and I don't anymore because they cause me to have psychosis. And I've had more negative experiences such as psychosis. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. And that's something that I know does happen for people. For some people, meditation is not good. It's not a good thing. Same with mindfulness, Yeah, it's something that, you hear all the time, especially in like wellness circles, about how, mindfulness is the answer to everything and everyone should meditate and blah, blah, blah. But sometimes that's not ideal. Sometimes that's not what's right for people. And it can add to certain negative consequences of mental illness, mental health issues, and so on. So, yeah, I think it's important to be able to trust yourself in that, and go for what's right for you. And as with all of this stuff, with all of this conversation, it is about making sure that the locus of control is within yourself, that you do preserve that autonomy of mind and freedom of mind and freedom of life, really. Deja vu, though, lol, that is something that just fascinates me to this day. There's so many weird little theories about it, and I just love it. But yeah, so what else have we got here that you've said? Tekvo, you've been in the bath. Tevka, sorry, you've been in the bath and listening. I'm glad I hope I've been sufficiently entertaining for your bath experience as a soundtrack to that. Very true, very true. Mental illness and trauma can make you more vulnerable to cults. And that's something that definitely supports what I sort of assert really on the issue of therapy, if it's available to you, and if it's not, psychoeducation in the form of books and anything that really helps from a verified sort of evidence-based source. Definitely do that. Journaling as well, really useful. I found that really useful. Maybe not for everybody, but I feel everyone should try it at least a couple of times. I believe actually there's some evidence on, here's something interesting for you. Before we close, let me just give you this little tidbit on expressive writing. Try and find it here. And the usefulness and the benefit of expressive writing with regards to mental health and recovery. Oh my God, I've got so many notes to wade through. Here we go. It's on the point of art therapy and expressive writing. I've got this is me taking notes from one of the books I've recommended here today, Transcend by Scott Barry Kaufman. And he's drawing from studies as he's saying this. He says people with low levels of anxiety and low levels of experiential avoidance, otherwise sort of conceptualized as high levels of psychological flexibility, tend to report to have enhanced quality of life and an increased sense of meaning. Intrusive rumination causes a decline in areas of growth. However, deliberate rumination increases in 5 domains of post-traumatic growth. 2 of the domains, positive changes in relationships and increases of perceptions, newness and new possibilities in one's life, were associated with increased perceptions of creative growth. So creative pursuit, I think, is super important in this context as well. If you want to get to know yourself better, and I think when it comes to trauma recovery, a lot of what I've been reading and hearing about the idea of art therapy and expressive writing is really useful. So here, one last thing to read you. Writing about a topic that produces strong emotion for just 15 to 20 minutes a day has been shown to help people create meaning from their stressful experiences and better express both positive and negative emotions, which is the benefit of journaling in a nutshell, you know, in my experience. And I think a big part of it here in terms of trauma growth, in my experience as well, it's been that point of creating coherence from your experiences, being able to look at your experiences and find a continuity, a sense of coherence in them, and find a sense of meaning for yourself in them that helps you to move forward, not necessarily to justify or to blame, but to find a sense of coherence in those experiences. That's been really useful for me. And it's something I realized it comes quite naturally to me, thankfully, to be able to grow from trauma by finding that sense of coherence in them. I tend to find a greater sense of determination to make changes in my life as a consequence of difficult experiences, rather than retreating and sort of withdrawing back, which I know I think I'm drawing here from The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, where he talks about how being able to see a way out of a difficult experience makes you less likely to develop PTSD, I believe. But being able to have a sense of there's a way out of this, I can get myself out of this, there's a solution, I'm going to do X, Y, Z, makes you more likely to grow from the trauma and potentially not develop PTSD, in my experience, and also based on what I've read there, Bessel van der Kolk, on The Body Keeps the Score, another interesting book worth a read on the point of trauma. So let me just respond to what you said here in the chat, and then we'll call it a day. Thank you for what you're saying here. I really love that the conversation's got going here. Oh, there's another point here you've said. So Pokey, you've said, I've never done any substances. I just meditated, and when I was younger and had feelings of completeness and oneness, which got me into it. After that, I went downhill. So just sleep paralysis. Yeah, I think I'm glad that you've realized what works for you and what doesn't, and that you've been able to find something that works a bit better now. You said here, I find NDE experiences, near-death experiences, fascinating. My theory is that we're not meant to experience some of the other realms. We're meant to be here and try and do good here in philosophy classes. The conclusion was that we just don't know. Yeah, near-death experiences are interesting. I often think of near-death experiences as something that happens to us, maybe we're seeing something else, I don't know. But what I think when we come back is that we rationalize it based on our own lifetime. So it's no mystery to me that Christianity being predominant in certain countries and people having near-death experiences which are Christian themed, seeing Jesus or something like that, it's no mystery to me why those two things correlate, you know. I think it's, you have the experience and then you come back and your brain just sort of slots it all into place and it makes it something cohesive. Now, whether you're actually experiencing something beyond, fuck knows. No, I don't know. But I think it's definitely an interesting concept. And to that end, I highly recommend checking out some of Alan Moore's work, because he's got some ideas on that. Some of them I'll be sort of touching on a little bit in next week's video, so you can look forward to that. Mia, you've said, journaling literally saved me from New Age spirituality. I cannot recommend it enough. I wrote myself free. That was not my intention. It just happened as a side effect. I'm really glad to hear that. And I can also attest to the genuine benefits of journaling 1,000-fold. Thank you for sharing that, Mia. Pokey, sleep paralysis is fascinating but terrifying when it happens. I've never experienced it. My sleep disturbances go the other way. I wake up and I do things and I talk and shout and all sorts of stuff. That runs in the family. My one of my grandfathers punched my grandma in the face in the dream once, because he was dreaming that another guy was chatting her up. It's kind of sweet, you know, they've been married for years, but he was dreaming that another guy was chatting his wife up and tried to punch the guy in his sleep, but actually punched my gran in the face. Funny. But yeah, so that sort of those sort of sleep disturbances run in the family. I don't think I've punched anyone. I've kicked Astrid before in my sleep, because in my mind I was kicking a scary dog in the dream that was trying to attack me, and I was trying to, was it a dog or was it a boar? I don't know. That's a whole conversation for another time. The kind of conversation there where it gets a little bit more personal and me sharing crazy shit from my life is the kind of thing that we talk about a bit more in the Patreon. So if you want to hear more on that sort of personal stuff and a little bit less topic and a little bit more, you know, personal sort of stuff, then definitely join the Patreon and come to the Patreon end of the month things, because that's always quite fun. So what have you said here? Keep a journal about negative thoughts and read them aloud after I've calmed down. That sounds quite useful. One thing that my therapist recommended was that I don't just journal when it's negative, so that I don't associate feeling with just the negative things, because my struggle has been actually feeling and like letting my emotions exist. But I could definitely see that being really useful as well. Yeah. I practice tarot to give myself answers. I think tarot is really useful. It can be really useful in that context. I find it sometimes gives me more data that I don't need and just fills my head with lots of extra ideas and stuff that may not be useful to me, but I have had it be very useful in the past. And I had a friend do a reading for me a little while back, and I found that very useful and put me in the right direction. So, hey, Shade, welcome, and thank you for the super sticker. I really appreciate that. I can't see the sticker in StreamYard, but I appreciate that. Pokey, you've said, when I read William Boyd's Any Human Heart Ever, since 16, I kept a journal and learn every day is therapeutic. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. It really does go a long way. It really does go a long way. And I've never heard of that book, but it sounds like a good read. I'd have to put it on my list, perhaps. And Pam, you said, my dad dreamt a cat was pissing in his garden and threw it over a wall. That cat happened to be my mum's food. Fantastic. Amazing. I will, yeah, Tevko, thank you. And so before I make a move here, I want to just say thank you everybody for coming along here and for sharing your thoughts and stuff on the things that we've discussed. Please follow me over on Instagram. That's where I'm most active social media wise these days. I occasionally drop into Twitter, but it is a smelly place and I don't like to hang around long because the stench hangs around me for days afterwards. So please join me on Instagram. That's the place I'm enjoying most at the moment. And I'm sharing some really cool insights. I think they're cool over on there as well. I've been posting every day the last week or so. So yeah, lots of extra stuff on there. If you're liking these kinds of discussions and things, especially on the point of freedom of mind, autonomy of self, and sort of really becoming an individual. That's been my focus lately. And I'm always sort of shouting people out on there and sharing other things. So if you're also making content on there, then definitely follow me. And if I like what you're doing, I'll share it out as well. So yeah, thank you everybody that came along to this live stream. Please check out the Patreon if you want to help support the channel and get a bit of extra content from me every week. And I just seen what you said there, Mia. I'm not gonna have time to respond to that now, Mia, but thank you for sharing it, and I'll check it out afterwards and maybe drop you a comment. But yeah, thank you everybody for coming along. Please check out the Patreon and the Instagram to support the channel and stay in this conversation with me. And yeah, look after yourselves, stay safe, and please be kind and ask good questions. And I'll see